Hello, dear viewers, and greetings to those watching us online. On March 18, 1965, a historic event took place. Soviet cosmonaut Alexei Leonov became the first person to walk in outer space. Triumph of the Soviet Union. This was the headline in newspapers and news reports around the world just hours after the event. Soon after, stamps and posters were issued, and the country celebrated its achievement. The crew's training for this historic mission officially began on August 15, 1964, and was completed by March 7, 1965. The training program included exercises on a specially equipped Tu-104 aircraft. A special inflatable airlock was designed for Alexei Leonov's spacewalk. You can see it on your screens now. Here, you can also see it being tested in a centrifuge before being sent into space. This is how the crew was sent off by the stars of Soviet space exploration, Sergei Korolev and Yuri Gagarin, who gave their final words of encouragement to mission commander Pavel Belyayev. And here, the cosmonauts are being transported by bus to the launch site. It is important to note that the scope and quality of the crew's training ensured the successful completion of the mission. This is a quote from the crew's post-mission report, which would be prepared shortly after the flight. At the same time, take a look at some practical but crucial notes for the training of crew members, made by the cosmonauts. The onboard food supply includes a number of products that cause thirst. These include meat products such as fried meat, chicken fillet, and similar items. It seems necessary to reconsider the principles of meal selection. And, by the way, we know that American astronauts before their supposed space missions were fed fried meat, the very type of food that later required significant water consumption. Now, you are watching archival footage from that time. This is the launch of the spacecraft. And here is an excerpt from the report. Slight vibrations and shaking were observed, especially between 60 and 70 seconds into the ascent. These are photographs from orbit, capturing that very first spacewalk. The hero cosmonaut later recorded, "When exiting the airlock, I tried to reach the S-97 model movie camera with my hand. This caused the spacecraft to start rotating at a speed of approximately 10 degrees per second. This means that the spacecraft completed a full rotation around its axis in just over half a minute." This is archival footage from that era, iconic images with the inscription USSR that soon spread worldwide. What did Alexei Leonov see? In his notes, he wrote, "Against the backdrop of the dark sky, dark purple fading into black, bright, motionless stars could be seen. There was no halo or solar corona around the sun. The Earth, however, was clearly visible. The Black Sea, Novorossiysk Bay, the Kerch Peninsula, and the Caucasus Mountains could all be distinctly observed." All of this is recorded in a report by Roscosmos, which was declassified a few years ago. The report includes a general section as well as individual reports from each member of that very crew. Shortly after, literally within a day, the famous posters were released. One of them you can see now, "The Victory of Two, the Victory of Millions." This is how the people of Earth greeted these heroic figures with flowers. Newspapers reported that everything went well. But it wasn't just Soviet newspapers. Western publications also dedicated front-page stories to this historic event. Here's what was noted in the New York Times. I specifically included a quote highlighting how foreign journalists pointed to the next expected step following the first spacewalk. Moscow says, "Moon trip is target now." This is how they interpreted the events of March 18, 1965, in their reports. In the same newspaper, just a few pages later, several more articles were published about the event in orbit. I made a special note of what you now see on the screen, marked with a red rectangle in the lower left corner. I will now read this phrase to you. The United States plans nothing exactly comparable to the Soviet astronaut's trip outside his spacecraft until the fifth two-man Gemini flight, scheduled for next year. In other words, the experts consulted by this leading American political publication to cover the Soviet cosmonauts' spacewalk on March 18 explicitly stated that there were no public plans for American astronauts to perform spacewalks in the near future. All engineering plans were set only for 1966. Thus, in the spirit of competition, the Soviet Union secured another victory. But, of course, the Americans were not going to give up. Just a couple of months after these statements were published in the New York Times, what happened next? Let's try to ask our good friend and expert, Leonid Konovalov. So, how did it all unfold, Leonid Vasilyevich?
If we watch this footage, it really seems like a documentary. But if we examine it closely, pausing the video from time to time, it's easy to conclude that it is just a short film shot in a studio. There was no actual spacewalk, it was simply a staged production.
And which footage are we talking about, Leonid Vasilyevich?
The spacewalk of Edward White, who according to NASA's official version, went into outer space 2.5 months after Leonov. Since this was the first American spacewalk, they put a lot of effort into it and produced an excellent short film, perhaps even a movie, lasting about 20 minutes. But unfortunately, not a single frame is documentary. Everything was created using techniques well known in Hollywood, and that's exactly what I'd like to discuss now. According to the official version, this happened on Gemini 4. Since the Americans were not officially preparing for spacewalks, the story goes that the astronauts secretly decided to prepare, open the hatch, step into space, and surprise the world, without NASA's knowledge.
Решили как бы втихаря, мы подготовимся, незаметно от НАСА откроем люк, выйдем в открытый космос и удивим весь мир.
Meanwhile, in the Soviet Union, preparations were long and meticulous. For example, here are Alexei Leonov's recollections of visiting Korolyov's Special Design Bureau in late 1963, where space vehicles were being built. We studied space technology. Sergei Korolyov met us, took us to the workshop, and showed us a model of the Voskhod spacecraft, which was equipped with some strange chamber. Noticing our surprise, he explained that it was an airlock for exiting into outer space. Sergei Pavlovich suggested that I put on a spacesuit and try to carry out an experiment. After 2 hours of work, Alexei Leonov said, "Yes, it's difficult, but we will still strive to go into outer space."
How boring these Russians are, spending 2 years preparing for something.
That means that at least a year and a half before the spacewalk, the airlock was already ready. The Americans had nothing. They simply opened the hatch door and stepped into outer space. Now, I would like to go into more detail about the history and see whether we can observe the development of American space technology.
американской космической техники.
It is known that the Americans started with single-seat Mercury capsules.
Одноместный Меркурий. Вот они
This is
были
shown in the
одноместные
illustration.
капсула.
Then came the two-seat Gemini spacecraft, and finally, the Apollo spacecraft were designed for 3 astronauts. A few words about Mercury. For comparison, the launch vehicle that sent Yuri Gagarin into orbit, the Vostok rocket, is shown here. Next to it is a U.S. ballistic missile, on which, according to the official version, Alan Shepard first flew into space. However, this was not an orbital flight. The rocket simply ascended, crossed the 100-kilometer boundary of space, and fell back down within 15 minutes. The launch vehicle was too weak to reach the low Earth orbit. An interesting detail about the first Mercury missions. The capsule was positioned at the top of the launch vehicle, and the astronaut lay with his feet pointing upward. Usually, when photographs of an astronaut in the capsule are shown, they depict him sitting, like a driver in a car, looking straight ahead. But in reality, he was lying upside down. According to NASA's official version of Shepard's first flight, he spent 4.5 hours in this position. To prevent excessive blood flow to the head during launch in high G-forces, Soviet cosmonauts were positioned so that their heads remained above their feet, at a specific angle. The reclined position helped them endure the G-forces better. However, in all the American photos of spaceflight training, we see astronauts practicing lying on their backs with their feet elevated. If we now look at the two-seat Gemini spacecraft, we see the same setup, astronauts positioned with their feet upward. Astronauts supposedly performed a spacewalk on the fourth Gemini mission, while the first Gemini flight took place in April 1964. What happened there? The Gemini spacecraft failed to separate from the second stage, so both the spacecraft and the second stage orbited together before burning up in the atmosphere. That's how the first Gemini flight ended. The second Gemini flight,
It was uncrewed.
the second mission was also uncrewed, but they placed mannequins inside. If we look at the planned Gemini flight program, we see that the first phase consisted of test flights of the spacecraft without crews, following a ballistic trajectory, essentially like firing a projectile from a cannon and letting it fall. The second Gemini mission took place in January 1965, exactly 2 months before Alexei Leonov's spacewalk. Gemini 2 reached an altitude of 160 kilometers and fell into the ocean after 19 minutes, along with the mannequins. So, while the Soviet Union was already conducting spacewalks, the Americans were still trying to take off and land softly using a parachute after 19 minutes in the air. Then came the third Gemini mission, and supposedly, during the fourth flight, a spacewalk took place. Let's look at what was planned. The first phase consisted of basic test flights. The second phase involved launching 4 crewed spacecraft for missions lasting up to 14 days. The third phase included launching 8 spacecraft to conduct orbital rendezvous experiments. That means that in the fourth phase, after launch, they were expected to complete all these tasks. Now, I'll show you some pictures. You can see that they are lying in an extremely awkward position, with their feet pointing upward. Below them, ground personnel are working, or in the top right corner, we see a mission control worker standing while the astronauts remain upside down. Supposedly, in this extremely uncomfortable position, they were launched into space. We see 2 astronauts, Edward White and James McDivitt. When someone analyzes these photographs, certain inconsistencies stand out. For example, in the left-hand photo, the astronauts are approaching the capsule to board it. This was taken just minutes before launch. Meanwhile, in another photo, supposedly taken in outer space, their suit details look completely different. In the pre-launch image, we see drawstrings, laces, and a short gray sleeve. But in the space photo, the sleeve is light-colored and much longer. The astronauts couldn't have changed their suits between these two moments. Studies have pointed out many inconsistencies, such as differences in mission patches, gloves, and other details, but I won't focus on that. Instead, I want to discuss the bigger picture of how this was staged.
Hold on, let's clarify this before you move on to analyzing what supposedly happened in outer space. So, there are works by independent researchers from different countries pointing out what we'll call inconsistencies in the photographic evidence of how the Gemini 4 crew members appeared right before launch.
Just minutes before launch.
And how they appear in the photos allegedly taken in orbit, correct?
Yes.
All right.
It will be easy to understand now because I'll reveal a secret. The astronaut who supposedly performed the spacewalk was played by a completely different person.
Do you know his name?
No, I don't know his name. When the rocket launched on June 3rd, they immediately hyped it up. The reason is that just before this, the Intelsat satellite had been launched, allowing the broadcast of the rocket's launch not only in the United States but also in 12 European countries. The interest was so high that over 1,000 journalists were invited to the launch, and NASA even rented a separate venue for them. The launch was shown live on television. After liftoff, the astronauts' first task was to successfully separate from the second stage, which they did. The launch vehicle was the Titan III. For some time, the Gemini spacecraft and the Titan's second stage traveled together, Gemini in front, with the Titan's second stage behind it. It was concocted that they fired their engines, turned the spacecraft around, and maneuvered around the second stage, supposedly flying past it from one side and then the other.
Maybe they were just bored?
They made it all up. If you look at the history of the Gemini program, they pulled off all sorts of stunts. They started racing around. First, they reached orbit, overtook the stage, then turned around, flew around it. They put on such a show up there that today, similar tasks take a long time and are done very carefully on the International Space Station when docking a spacecraft. They were essentially simulating docking procedures, proximity operations, and other training exercises. But in the Gemini 4 mission, they failed to get close. So, they just said, well, we won't do it then. Half the fuel is already spent, let's move on to other tasks. Now, about the spacewalk. I already mentioned that they had nothing prepared. The official decision to conduct a spacewalk was made only on May 25th, and by June 3rd, they had supposedly already done it. That means in just 8 or 9 days, they decided, we're going out into space. Of course, preparing for a spacewalk in just 8 days is completely unrealistic. We saw that in the Soviet Union, a year and a half before the first spacewalk, the airlock was already built and being tested. And here they're saying, boom, and we're out. So, I'd like to talk a bit about how Alexei Leonov's spacewalk differed from White's. Naturally, everyone remembers and always mentions Leonov's first spacewalk. But the second Soviet spacewalk was even more interesting. It was in 1969 when Yevgeny Krenov and Alexei Yeliseyev transferred from one spacecraft to another through outer space. Yet this second spacewalk is rarely discussed in as much detail. The first one, however, is widely covered because it was a groundbreaking moment. The Americans understood the same thing. If this was going to be the first spacewalk, they needed to make a great visual spectacle. The mission had to be heavily promoted. But we see that Alexei Leonov exited through an airlock. I even went to the Space Corporation Energia Museum in Korolyov near Moscow to see what the airlock looked like. I checked out the training photos. In the top right corner, there's a 16mm movie camera in a special screen vacuum thermal insulation to protect it from the harsh sunlight. The famous color footage was shot with a 16mm camera using Kodak Ektachrome reversal film. When the camera's cover was removed, the motor started running. Interestingly, in Soviet spacecraft, hatches open inward. This is because there's atmospheric pressure inside the spacecraft pressing the hatch shut, while outside is a vacuum. But the Americans had a completely different setup. First, their hatch had a very large surface area, with a complex design and intricate profile. We calculated that even at a pressure lower than 1 atmosphere, about 0.33 atmospheres, the force acting on that hatch would still be around 2 tons. So, their hatch opened outward, against a force of about 2 tons. Honestly, that hatch was not designed for spacewalks. And if you look at the hinges, everyone says they were just piano hinges, like on a grand piano lid. In other words, nothing was properly prepared. Initially, NASA officials and mission planners said, let's just have our astronaut poke his head out of the hatch into space. That's exactly what we recently saw with Jared Isaacman, who supposedly performed a spacewalk by simply leaning halfway out of the hatch.
Same old script, just 60 years later.
Yes, everything repeats itself. But then they say, no, let's go all the way out. If we don't count passing through the airlock, Alexei Leonov was actually in outer space for 12 minutes and 9 seconds. The Americans said, to make our achievement more impressive, we need to stay out twice as long. Let's do 12 minutes times 2, that makes 24. As a result, according to the official records, they spent 23 minutes in outer space. Why do I say, they? Because the entire spacecraft depressurized. When it was time to return, the hatch wouldn't close. McDivitt stayed inside on one side, while White drifted out into space. And when he tried to return, he couldn't get the hatch shut. But before we get to that, let me read out the official transcript of their conversation. McDivitt, they want you to come back in now. White, laughing, ha ha ha, I'm not coming back. What a joke. McDivitt, get in. White, I hate to come back to you, but I am coming back. McDivitt, come on, let's get back here before it gets dark. White, I doubt it. McDivitt, come on. White, this is the saddest moment of my life. It's obvious that these lines were written by a Hollywood scriptwriter, because if we,
second year, I guess,
of the screenwriting department, if we listen to actual astronaut communications, they don't sound like this. They use call signs and communicate briefly and clearly, but here, it's just literary dramatization. What's interesting is that when Edward White describes what he saw, it completely contradicts what we'll actually observe. We're about to analyze 9 minutes of zero-G footage, and the entire time, the surface below is covered in clouds. You can't see where the spacecraft is flying or what's happening below. But White describes it like this: I saw breathtaking scenes, an incredible richness of colors. The bright hues of the sky transitioned to views of clouds, land, and ocean. The deep azure of the ocean, the greens and browns of the land, all looked far more natural than they do from an airplane flying at a relatively low altitude. That's how poetically he described what he saw. Then came time to return, but the hatch wouldn't close. The second astronaut says he helped him shut it. We used both hands to close the hatch. But between them, there was a partition, with only a small opening for an oxygen hose. So, I have no idea how the second astronaut managed to reach through and help with his other hand.
Maybe he pushed from above?
Could be. Anyway, that's exactly what I want to talk about now, how this all supposedly happened. On the third orbit, they allegedly went into outer space. And what did they show on live TV? We understand that, in reality, nothing was actually ready for a spacewalk. So, do you know what they showed in the live broadcast?
An animation?
An animation. Here's a 1-minute clip.
Out of his spacecraft, but attached to it by a nylon tether. As a point of curiosity, in earthly terms, White walked the distance from...
Is this what was shown to audiences in the US and 12 other countries?
No, only the launch was broadcast to 12 countries. This happened 5 hours later, after it had supposedly completed 3 orbits. There's interference, and now there will be a live broadcast. This is supposedly a voice from space. A caption appears saying it's a real voice from space.
Flight director says get back in. Jim, what got any message for us?
This is for the viewers.
Are they visualizing how the process took place?
Yes, so the audience could imagine what was happening up there. This was Gemini 4. In Gemini 9, the spacewalk lasted longer, so instead of animation, they used an actor suspended on a wire in a studio. That was Gemini 9. The actor demonstrated how he exited the spacecraft, set up a camera, and moved toward the nose of the capsule. Supposedly, he was already 12 minutes in outer space. You can see that the word simulation is displayed. Another detail is that the actor was suspended from the back, hanging in a U shape. When we look at the first American spacewalk by Ed White, he will be hanging the exact same way. They'll show us the same thing, just slightly slowed down and in color. White had a special device with a camera attached, supposedly containing compressed oxygen cartridges, kind of a gun. This was meant for maneuvering in space. Pressing a button would release a jet of gas, propelling the astronaut in the opposite direction. However, this device was barely used, at least, there's no video evidence of it being used as intended. First, it would have been difficult to hold with the gloves on. There was also a camera mounted on top, supposedly for taking photographs. But in reality, this device was used for a completely different purpose, and because of that, it exposed many movie bloopers. I'll show how this device made it obvious that there were many bloopers. This gun was used differently. The astronaut performed certain pre-arranged actions in the studio, following the director's instructions. For example, he passed the device from one hand to the other, causing the hose to sway.
On purpose?
Yes, on purpose. We'll analyze that now. I believe they shot many takes. I'll share my estimate of how many. The sequence begins with the astronaut turning on the camera.
Are we watching the video footage now?
Yes, these are freeze frames from the footage. In the bottom left corner, you can see the gun dangling. First, he turns on the camera, and the recording begins. The first shot shows his hand over the camera. Then he drifts away and stays in one spot for a long time, about a minute and a half, swaying back and forth. Then he slowly moves further away. What we just saw in these 3 episodes is modern computer processing. According to the official story, 16mm film was in short supply, so they had to conserve it. Instead of shooting at the standard 24 frames per second, they filmed at 6 frames per second. Later, each frame was duplicated 4 times to create the illusion of 24 FPS. That's why the movements appear jerky. Today, computers generate in-between frames to smooth out motion and remove artifacts. A DVD was released with a film showing this footage, where the camera was noticeably shaking.
Okay, my feet are out. I think I'm dragging a little bit, so I don't want to fire the gun yet. Okay, I'm out. Okay, he's out. Close to free.
Firing a gun means using this jet-powered device. The whole image is shaky. Interestingly, it seems they used the worst movie camera in the world, one with no image stabilization, a jammed pull-down claw dragging the film, making the image constantly jitter. In reality, these jitters were intentional because you can see the actor is hanging on a wire. When they start moving him with a crane, he wobbles and shakes. To make this less noticeable, they came up with the idea that the footage was supposedly shot at a very low frame rate and then duplicated. Everything seems to be going as expected. And then, 3 minutes after he pushed off and started floating, something completely unexpected happens. A glove flies out of the hatch. There it is. It hits the hose and continues drifting into space.
The best improvised moment. Directed in advance?
Yes, I keep wondering, where did this glove come from? Maybe the second astronaut, who stayed inside, accidentally lost his own glove. Or maybe they packed a few extra ones in the spacecraft just in case.
Or technician Joe Schmo forgot it.
Well, maybe. The moment I saw that glove, I knew it was just a composite shot.
Explain.
Some people think this was filmed with chroma key, like it's done today. The first use of chroma key was in the movie The Thief of Baghdad. The process is known as the traveling matte method. The actor was filmed separately against a green or blue background. Then, 2 separate black and white images were created. One called a matte, which showed the actor as a black silhouette on a white background, and the other a counter matte, which was the reverse. First, the matte was used to block out the actor while the background was printed onto a new film strip. Then, the counter matte was used to superimpose the actor onto the background. Since you can see light spill in the right frame, with no sharp edge between black and white, just a smooth transition, it's easy to spot composite shots by looking at the outlines around a subject. The Thief of Baghdad is a great film with giant monsters. You can clearly see the outlines around the flying carpet, around the hand. Even when I watch Back to the Future and pause at a frame, I can still see the outlines. So, looking closely, I can tell this is a composite shot. The Americans knew that in the 1960s, before computers, all these outlines would be noticeable. That's why I can say for sure that this glove is real. Meaning, it wasn't added through double exposure with chroma key, it's genuinely in the same shot. But the most interesting part is how this glove was filmed. In the cinematography textbook we studied at film school, there's a chapter called Filming with an Unusual Camera Setup. Now, I'll show you a clip from the Jean-Paul Belmondo movie, Animal, where he plays a stuntman, and you'll immediately understand what an unusual camera setup is. He's rescuing a woman from the 6th floor. There are flames above, and he's crawling up a vertical wall.
But in reality, he's crawling horizontally.
We'll see in a moment.
Non, ça va, coupez! Mike, je t'ai dit, je ne veux pas voir ton visage.
The stuntman accidentally showed his face in the shot.
Jeanne, toi non plus, je ne veux pas voir ton visage. Je ne veux pas vous voir. C'est simple, on recommence, allez en place. Allez, on commence, tout le monde.
The backstage is revealed.
Yes.
Colle-toi contre la façade. C'est pas difficile, en place, moteur. Allons.
Progrès 125 septième.
So, what's the deal? When I see the glove flying out, I understand that the camera was simply positioned in a completely different way. What techniques were used here? Reverse filming. That is, the glove didn't fly out, it flew in. At the edge of the frame, a person was standing and throwing the glove downward. But what's the trick? If I simply throw the glove, it will fall slowly at first, then accelerate more and more. So, to prevent the secret from being revealed, the glove was thrown from the side. It hit something, creating one trajectory. Then it struck the edge of the hatch, creating a second trajectory. Then a third time. The glove's flight consists of 3 zigzags. Now, what else is interesting here? I'm about to discuss purely cinematic techniques. I just talked about unusual camera positioning. We see the astronaut hanging. Right now, it may not be very visible, but in the video, it will be clearer. The air supply hose hangs in an arc, and a ribbon is positioned horizontally. But in reality, if we rotate the image, we'll see that the white ribbon is actually hanging straight down. In other words, the camera was simply turned 90 degrees. The astronaut was actually hanging like this. The camera was rotated, making the ribbon, which originally hung vertically, appear to be floating horizontally, as if in 0G. The directors came up with all sorts of tricks. Let's hang a ribbon. It'll look unusual, fluttering horizontally. That can't happen on Earth. But it can happen, if you rotate the frame by 90 degrees. Now, let's watch the video and see what else is interesting here. A whole story was built around this ribbon. If you watch the full 9-minute video without paying close attention, you just see something moving, turning, spinning. But in reality, the actor is performing a lot of specific actions. For example, the spacesuit has a very interesting feature. The helmet rotates around its axis. That's something we never had. His helmet was on bearings, so it rotated freely left and right. This design was never used again, only in these first unique flights. Now, I'll show you the video, and I want you to pay attention to the bottom left corner. I'll pause for a second. Do you see how he turns the helmet?
Yes.
Now, I'll pause again to show another detail you should focus on. Keep watching the bottom left corner. On Earth, there's air resistance. So, to make the ribbon appear to swing naturally in zero gravity, they came up with a trick. They took a ribbon. Here it is, hanging. The astronaut looks to the left. Meanwhile, below, in the bottom left corner, there's a compressor releasing air in bursts. He nudges the ribbon, and the air blows. To time it just right, he swings the ribbon one way, and the compressor blows it back in the other direction. To see where the compressor is blowing, there's another small ribbon in the bottom left corner. He watches as that ribbon begins to rise, then flicks his own ribbon at just the right moment. The air reaches it, and his hanging ribbon flies back. Now, let's watch the video. I've looped 7 seconds to make it easier to see. In the bottom left corner, the ribbon wobbles, meaning air is coming from there. He looks in that direction, his ribbon swings one way, and then the airflow knocks it back. In other words, the swinging motion of the ribbon was created using compressed air. In one hand, he holds a jet-powered gun for maneuvering. Later, he switches it to the other hand, merely so that at that very moment the hose will tremble. Supposedly his breathing becomes difficult. He realizes something in the hose is bent and starts shaking it. But in reality, I can see that the helmet's rotation on bearings and the swaying movements are purely cinematic tricks. Let's watch the video. How is this done? I demonstrated this filming technique using a toy astronaut. The astronaut is suspended by two thin wires. Two are used instead of one to prevent him from spinning around his axis. That's why two wires are typically used. Below, there's a mock spacecraft model with an open hatch. Then, the glove is tossed from the side. It hits the corner, bounces off, lands on the hatch, and since the hatch is tilted, it slides downward. We can see that the glove moves the fastest when it approaches the hatch at the bottom. Let's take a closer look. We position the astronaut, rotate the camera 90 degrees, and erase the wires against a black background. I deliberately used white threads to make them visible. Against a black background, a black wire wouldn't be seen. The astronaut appears to be in this orientation only because we turned the camera. Now, everything is slowed down. Watch. The glove rises quickly, then moves slowly. I'll now show how this was actually done in reverse. Here's the reverse footage. In slow motion, the glove strikes the hose, quickly gains speed, falls, and flies downward. The trajectory consists of 3 distinct sections. This is a well-known technique, reverse motion filming. Such techniques are widely used for filming dangerous moments. For example, when a car or train nearly hits a person, the car is placed next to the person first, then driven backward, and the person also steps backward. Many movies have used this method. For instance, in Home Alone, when the car with the 2 bandits almost hits the boy, it was actually filmed in reverse. The car was stationary next to him and then pulled backward on a wire. You can even see the boy's scarf blowing forward due to the sudden movement. In short, reverse filming is a widely used technique. Now, let's take NASA's original footage and watch it from the 3rd or 4th second. Do you notice that this device flies into his hand by itself? This is the original NASA footage.
Thump. It landed perfectly.
Now, let me show the reversed version. In reality, he lets go of it, and it falls downward due to gravity. But it can't fall all the way down because there's a black jacket from which the oxygen hose emerges. And now everything makes sense. After watching this clip, I found 5 instances where the cause and effect relationship is broken. First, the glove. It's clearly been filmed in reverse. Then, there's the camera or jet gun, as they call it. I can show the original NASA clip again. Look, snap, it flies right into his hand. If you just munch on popcorn and watch casually, it seems real. But if you look closer, whoa, it was filmed backward. Besides reverse filming, there are incredible shots where the astronaut appears upside down. How were those shots filmed? This is another cinematic technique. For example, here the cause and effect order is also broken. First, the sleeve suddenly shakes violently. To justify the movement, the astronaut then switches the device from one hand to the other. But now, I've corrected the order to how it should be. First, he moves the device from one hand to the other. Then, the hose shakes, followed by the black structure shaking. Let me show it again. Without any apparent reason, the black hose sleeve starts swinging. In the original video, there's no cause and effect relationship. Only now does the astronaut shake the hose. In other words, the large amplitude swinging started before he grabbed the hose and switched the gun from one hand to the other.
If you play it in reverse,
Now I'm playing it in reverse. See, he switches the gun and shakes the hose.
and then everything becomes clear.
Now everything starts shaking with a large amplitude. I found 5 such moments. The glove, this device, the shaking of the tether, and 2 more that I won't focus on now because they are very similar.
Leonid Vasilievich, but they could easily explain it like this. Why are you nitpicking? We filmed everything correctly. We just played it in reverse for clarity.
What's also interesting is that I want to show a fragment from Stanley Kubrick's movie, 2001, A Space Odyssey. The thing is, the Space Odyssey project was actually a cover operation. Kubrick was developing the technology for faking the moon landing footage. He was behind schedule. They told him, "You were supposed to deliver the project in 1968. But Apollo 11 filming has already started, and you're not ready." So, he was testing various techniques for creating zero-G and projecting mountain landscapes onto a screen behind the actors.
Please remind our viewers of the film's release year.
1968. And Apollo 11 was in 1969. Of course, the film was released in 1968, but they started shooting it 2.5 years earlier. The flight attendant, wearing magnetic shoes, walks and enters a door on the ceiling. Viewers were puzzled. How is this filmed? The actress swayed slightly. You probably didn't notice. How is it filmed? I revealed the secret. I played the shot a little differently. You'll see how in a moment. As you might have guessed, the actress stood upright while the entire set rotated.
An illusion ride?
Yes. When the actress reaches the lowest point, the set will stop, and there will be a jolt. You'll see that jolt.
There.
When I watch the Spacewalk, I also see these jolts. I think they filmed at least 60 takes of White Spacewalk. Something kept going wrong. One thing, then another, then something else. I want to show the rotating set again with other examples. Here's the In Sync music video, Bye Bye Bye. This is how the rotating set was made. The producer explains how it rotated and where the bearings were installed.
What year was that?
I think about 15 years ago. You probably recognize these singers. Justin Timberlake. Now I want to show another rotating wheel structure. This is from Stanley Kubrick's 2001, A Space Odyssey. Obviously, you can't build such a giant multi-story wheel in a week. This was a rotating set where some scenes were filmed. So, Kubrick was preparing, developing these rotating structures, figuring out how they should look, shooting certain scenes, and refining the technology. I took 2 minutes from the film. White goes into outer space and started rotating the frame. You'll see that he is always hanging vertically downward. In reality, you can hardly see any land. Just a small fragment, and then it's all cloud cover. I slightly sped it up compared to the original. We see the astronaut entering the frame. He starts moving and swinging the ribbon. The ribbon sways one way and then the other. Now the set has started to rotate. To make sure you don't notice the jerks at the start of the rotation, he makes distracting movements, shaking the hose, which then swings, and so on. Here, he pushes against the nose of his spacecraft. A cut occurs, and the entire rotating structure, along with the camera, begins to spin in the opposite direction. Again, we see that the entire horizon is covered with clouds, making it unclear what he is flying over. This is the speed at which the set was rotating, and the actor is hanging vertically with his feet downward. The position of the ribbon indicates that there is a center of gravity. The ribbon hangs straight down. Essentially, I showed you 2 minutes. Here's a splice. First, the rotation was in one direction, then there was a pause, and it started rotating in the other direction. Apparently, there was such a strong jolt that they had to cut out half a second. This is an edit on 16mm film, and it is clearly visible because there is no space between frames, and the splice runs right through the frame. And we will see this splice over and over again. Now, how were the sky, earth, and clouds in the background filmed? The fact is that Kubrick was working on these techniques in the same movie, A Space Odyssey. For example, we see a scene where a father is talking to his daughter, and in the background, we see Earth. This is rear projection, a projection of an image onto a movie screen behind him.
Hello. How are you, Squirt? What are you doing?
Playing.
Where's Mummy?
Gone to shopping.
Oh, who's taking care of you?
Rachel.
May I speak to Rachel, please?
She's gone to the bathroom. Are you coming to my party tomorrow?
I'm sorry, sweetheart, but I can't.
So, we see all these techniques in this film. In essence, I was demonstrating how Hollywood filmed these scenes. These shots are not historical. I wasn't there in those years. In 2009, they decided to make a documentary for the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11. But since those who participated in the Apollo missions also flew on other spacecraft, such as Mercury and Gemini, the film showed how those capsules were filmed against the sky. They used a large screen and a tilting platform. This was in 2009. This is how Hollywood now simulates spaceflight. In other words, they revealed the technology of how it was done in the past.
Leonid Vasilievich, let's try to calculate again. The movie, A Space Odyssey, directed by Stanley Kubrick, was released in 1968. So, based on how things work behind the scenes in Hollywood, it must have been filmed around 1966.
They actually started even earlier.
So, what you are telling us and showing us now, happened in early June 1965. Essentially, these were the first experimental developments for that big movie, for that big program, which was planned to continue in 1969, correct?
Yes. And another interesting thing, of course, in 1965, there was no way to show a docking or a spacewalk in color. Here's how the docking was filmed. They transported a model. So, they only broadcast a cartoon live on television. They had to build this setup, invent all these innovations, rehearse, refine all the movements of the hose, the glove, and integrate some additional elements. Just constructing the set itself, a giant rotating wheel, would take several months. First, it had to be designed, then it would take at least 6 months to build. They say that at the end of 1965, the documentary 4 Days of Gemini was released, which included color footage of a spacewalk. I believe that, in reality, the documentary couldn't have been released in 1965. It would have been impossible to shoot everything so quickly. It came out a little later, but then they claimed it was from 1965. Moreover, such documentary films were rarely shown separately in theaters or were shown very infrequently.
Just now, we heard some calculations regarding how, from a technological standpoint, the timing could and should have been handled. You're saying that by the end of 1965, it was unlikely they would have managed to shoot film footage of decent quality. Remember, in the New York Times article from March 19, experts were saying that everything had been planned.
Only for 1966.
And would they have had enough time in 1966?
Yes, they would have made it that year. What's interesting is that if we look at other Gemini missions, astronauts were already spending up to 2 hours in outer space. There were many more Gemini missions, 12 in total. But the filming was very primitive. They simply rotated the camera by 90 degrees, and that was it. Because everyone understood that people would only remember the very first spacewalk, and that's the one they would replay the most. A colossal amount of work was done. I think it could not have been completed in less than a year, maybe even longer. Because they had to design that entire setup, figure everything out, when to shake the hose, when the glove should float away. It's like figure skating. White's spacewalk was choreographed like a figure skating routine. At this second, you shake the hose. Then the camera starts. Now you do this. At this second you make another gesture. Just like in figure skating. And even then, there were still plenty of mistakes. At the end, I'll show some shots with errors. Some people ask, how is it done? So that he appears upside down at one moment and right side up the next. It's incredibly simple. When we watch videos of people paragliding with an instructor, we see shots from different angles, sometimes from above, sometimes from below. That's just a selfie stick. Hold it up, and it shoots from above, lower it, and it shoots from below. The same thing was done in the spacewalk footage. To create the illusion of distance, as if the astronaut had drifted far away, they used a 16mm camera with an ultra-wide angle 5mm lens. To convince the audience that it was all real, certain details were emphasized. For example, in the left image, we see the shadow of the camera. They say, look, there's the shadow, everything is real. When a person performs a spacewalk, they don't care whether the camera's shadow is visible on the spacecraft's hull. But here, they emphasize it. Look, this is the camera filming everything. Here, the astronaut touches it with his hand, starting the recording. Everything was carefully rehearsed. Where the shadow should fall, how many seconds to film, so that one action wouldn't interfere with another. Remember when the astronaut exited the spacecraft and bumped into its nose? The distance from the hatch opening to the nose of the spacecraft is what? About 1.5 meters. That means he only moved 1.5 meters away. But because of the wide-angle lens, he appears smaller. In reality, the astronaut only moves about 1.5 to 2 meters from the hatch. So, in those shots where he supposedly looks far away, he's actually just a little over 2 meters away. Now we'll see a diagram of the filming setup. The camera was attached near the hatch, at the location marked with a red dot. I don't know if it's clearly visible.
Right now, we're looking at the left side, and at the top, there's a red dot indicating the supposed camera mounting point.
From this position, you can see the right side open hatch and the astronaut. Now, let's watch the motion. As the astronaut appears to move away, he's actually suspended in place, while the capsule, along with the camera, rotates around him.
Just like the setup the Americans themselves built in 2009, which you showed us a minute ago. Right?
Yes. In the movie Inception, they also used a rotating rig. The astronaut's main task was to avoid making any sudden movements. Because if he jerked, he would start swinging.
And the whole illusion would fall apart.
Yes. That's why they told him, try not to move, and we'll rotate the camera around you. That was the actual diameter, but because of the ultra-wide-angle lens, it looks much farther away. In reality, it was quite close. I sketched how it roughly looked. The set rotated on two axes, around its own axis. The purple arrow shows that, and the red arrow indicates that there was a drum rotating on large bearings in a circular motion. The blue color represents the movie screen onto which the image was projected. They already had similar setups. When they were practicing how to control the Mercury capsule in space, they used a system where the discs rotated in different planes. Despite the dizziness, the astronaut had to stabilize the capsule. So, they already had these structures that rotated in two different planes, and the astronaut himself could rotate in a third. Originally, these were used as simulators. What I'm showing you is a simulator dating back to the Mercury capsules. You can see that in the middle, the astronaut is sitting and trying to control it despite the various rotations. Our cosmonauts had something similar. You've probably seen those swings that spin like this, but also rotate around their own axis. My team and I tried to create a scale model of this setup, 1/20 scale.
Why?
To show how this could have been filmed. People say, that's completely unrealistic, it's outer space, a real astronaut. So, we built the structure, turned off the lights, and now I want to show what it looks like.
When did you do all this?
We made it last year.
A fresh simulation.
Now I'll show a video that almost no one has seen. I uploaded it to YouTube, and only a few people watched it.
Don't get distracted. This is an exclusive.
Yes, and then I'll show footage that no one has seen at all. We're demonstrating how the spacewalk was filmed. White's spacewalk starts with his heels facing the camera. Then he exits the hatch and slowly moves forward. This is done using a crane. The crane arm lifts him out of the hatch. The actor moves away, then rotates 90 degrees, so instead of seeing his back, we start seeing him in profile. That's the rotation of the upper U-shaped bracket. On the right, that's our simulation.
Is that the same famous astronaut model that's on the table right now?
Not exactly. Here he has a backpack, but there he was without a backpack.
Have you started a collection already?
The rig allows the actor to rotate in two planes. There are 2 degrees of freedom here. First, the camera and the background rotate around an axis, and along with them, the light source turns as well. We see the actor from one side and then from the other. In our case, the atmosphere is visible, but in their footage, it isn't because they shot from an airplane, whereas I used a real photograph from space. You can clearly see that our set is rotating. This setup allows the actor to be seen first from the feet, and when it rotates along this plane, the camera then sees the helmet from above. In the final shot, It looks as if the actor is turning toward the camera first with his head, then with his feet.
Did you shoot this on a phone?
The image was output to both a camera and a phone. So basically, this is the answer to how White's spacewalk was filmed. This is a GoPro camera. Now we're getting closer to the helmet. If we had even a bit of funding, we would have tinkered together something just as sweet as the Americans did. But for now, it's just a GoPro, a 1/20 scale astronaut figure, and a rig that rotates in two different planes. You can see that at first, the camera shoots from the feet, then it rotates and captures the helmet from above. Then the astronaut is lifted on a cable, bringing him very close to the camera.
Alright, let's go behind the scenes a little for our viewers. So, you 3D printed a toy or bought it off AliExpress, right? And then built the rig?
Sasha Zenin helped us at NICFI by machining some parts.
Alexander Zenin helped you. Where did you say he was from?
From NICFI, the Cinema and Photo Research Institute.
Got it. You must have gone through a whole process to design and build this. Once you had your preliminary calculations, how long did it take to make the rig? A day or two?
Not exactly sure. I'll just show a few moments. First, we built a wooden platform, then searched for hoops that were also to scale, 120. We needed a diameter of 80 centimeters. This little toy was bought, and this one was made from clay. The guy in the shot made it from clay to make it look right. I tried buying one, but they only sell Armstrong figures with backpacks posed like in the photo, which wasn't what I needed. At first, our structure was stuck to the wooden base, so we had to place some wooden blocks underneath to lift it slightly, allowing it to rotate freely in both directions and perform two independent movements. So, I'm not exactly sure how long it took. Definitely not just a day or two, it took longer. But we got it done.
So, in a couple of weeks, you managed to pull it all off.
Give us the opportunity, and we'll do it full scale, 1-to-1, because there's nothing complicated about it. I've put together a few clips. When certain movements happen, the actor shakes all over. It looks like he's riding over bumps. He was hanging, they yanked him with the crane, he jerked, and then started maneuvering, balancing with his hands to steady himself. You can see that the moment he tries to do anything, he starts shaking. People don't behave like that in zero gravity. Now let's watch all these moments from start to finish, all 9 minutes. I'll speed them up a little. We saw how the gun flew into his hand. Moving on. White dreamed of becoming a pilot since childhood. His father was a military pilot, so at 12, he put his son in his plane. Ed White's dream of becoming a pilot came true, and later, he became an astronaut. He struggles to get out for a long time, and they deliberately blow air from a compressor. Since he was a military pilot, he obviously knew which hand to salute with. The left hand. So here, the person salutes with his left hand. He turns, and the helmet turns relative to the suit. To make it clear, I'll zoom in. Look, he turns, and you can see the helmet also rotates, and he salutes with his left hand. Every military person knows, you salute with your left hand. That's why I think this probably wasn't a real military guy but just some actor who didn't know any better. Then the glove flew by. The camera lowered, capturing the shot from below. The whole rig moves down, and now that famous glove comes flying out. It's obvious that someone was holding it just outside the frame and tossed it in. And to keep it from changing shape or flattening, since it was supposedly in zero gravity, they treated it with something like cement. Then come all sorts of movements we've described. Internet forum participants say, look, this is definitely real space. You could never fake this in a studio.
And let me remind you that in the black and white footage shown on American television as a flight simulation, this trajectory also passed over the continental part.
Of course, over Mexico. But here, we see nothing but clouds.
Before that, there was supposedly the deep blue of the Pacific Ocean, and then suddenly, some clouds rushed by, and now we can't see anything.
Just clouds everywhere. And here's something interesting. Just recently, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, the Americans officially released different footage. They stated that not only was a 16mm camera with an ultra-wide-angle lens filming, but to make it more interesting, the second astronaut took another camera and filmed from his position with a different framing.
Through the window?
No, he also opened the hatch. Everything was open, fully in outer space.
He wasn't credited with a spacewalk, was he?
I don't know. They themselves placed these two shots side by side. Since it takes a long time, I'll skip some moments. We will see that the left image does not match the right one. Sometimes they align, but sometimes they don't at all. For example, at the beginning, the astronaut exits, and only one camera is recording. Then I fast forward, speeding up unimportant fragments 12 times. Now the second camera joins when White supposedly moves away. He struggles to exit for a long time. He turns 90 degrees without any cause and effect logic. Occasionally, he moves out of frame. And now I'll slow it down. In the right half, his face and helmet are facing up, while in the left half, his face and helmet are facing down. I didn't edit anything, didn't shift one frame relative to another, just sped it up. The frames don't match. In one, his legs are up, in the other, they're in a completely different direction. Deliberately, so you wouldn't notice from this angle, the figure is constantly half overlapping. If you look closely, in the right half, the ribbon is pointing up, while in the left, it's pointing downward in the opposite direction. Now he flies up to the nose, bumps into it. I told you, the distance is just about 1.5 meters. He hit the craft's nose, said, "Fuck," pushed off, and flew further. I closely examined the position of the camera, the ribbons, they don't match. Meaning these are different takes. Now he tries to push off, but on the right side, we don't see him. It was planned this way. There was just a cut, did you notice? The image jumped. That's why I say this was rehearsed like a figure skating routine to music. Ta 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 ta. Second 5, second 6, second 10, second 125. Pushed off with his foot. Second 130. Switched it from one hand to another. Second 140. Shook it. Second 160. Saluted with his left hand. You see, the salute is given with the left hand. Despite filming many takes, I believe no fewer than 60, and months of rehearsals and training, likely 3 months in a row, they still edited it with mistakes. I was really surprised that they don't see how the left and right images sometimes look completely different. Concluding the discussion on this spacewalk, one could say that, from a technical standpoint, they weren't prepared for such a mission at all. The first Gemini in 1964 failed to separate its second stage, which burned up in the atmosphere. The second mission lasted only 19 minutes. In a 19-minute flight, of course, a spacewalk is impossible. It's the same as Elon Musk launching starships now. One burns up in the atmosphere, another splashes down in the ocean and breaks apart, another one burns up again. And now SpaceX says, let's go to the moon, everything is ready. It was the same back then. The first unmanned mission burns up in the atmosphere, the second one, with mannequins, lasts only 19 minutes. Then, in the third mission, they supposedly fly for 5 hours, and suddenly they decide, let's practice rendezvous and docking in space. They approach the second stage, circle around it, move away, then come closer again, and so on. Just in case, let's also try a spacewalk. The official decision to conduct a spacewalk was made only 9 days before launch. Nothing was prepared. All the stories about them secretly training and originally planning to exit the spacecraft without informing NASA are pure fiction. To conclude my report, I want to quote Alexander Popov, who is here with us today. The exposure of Gemini is of great importance. The foundation of the moon landings was built upon Gemini. Proving that this foundation is fake would deal a serious blow to the moon landing hoax. For the 50th anniversary of the Gemini project, the well-known American site The Atlantic wrote, NASA began a program, called Project Gemini, to prepare for the upcoming Apollo program. Astronauts and engineers accomplished hundreds of goals, including the first American spacewalk. After the project ended, many Gemini astronauts went on to fly Apollo missions to the moon. What can be said? Not only was there no spacewalk, some of the Gemini program missions never happened at all. That capsule was not designed for re-entry at orbital velocity. So, only suborbital flights took place, ascending to 160 kilometers and falling into the ocean after 19 to 20 minutes. Therefore, the Gemini mission with a spacewalk was, of course, nothing more than a pure Hollywood fabrication. In my book, When Will the US Admit They Never Went to the Moon?, I go into detail about the Mercury missions as well. Although the book's title refers to moonshots, I start with the Mercury and Gemini programs and conclude with the Mars rover landings, which are also falsifications. But in that case, Hollywood tricks weren't used. It was all just computer graphics and rendering. With that, I'd like to conclude today's discussion.
Leonid Vasilyevich, thank you very much for your presentation. Before we finish, allow me to once again recall the flight of our 2 cosmonauts, including Alexei Leonov and his commander Belyayev. From the report on that very mission, there are a few more key quotes worth highlighting. The first is from Belyayev. The inability to evacuate the crew from the landing site for 2 days indicates shortcomings in the organization and equipment of the rescue and recovery group. Helicopters of this group must be equipped with special means for the safe retrieval of spacecraft crews, particularly in hover mode, when landing in various climatic and geographical areas, including splashdown. This is a real report. Things didn't go perfectly. We know that when Leonov conducted his spacewalk, the situation was quite serious. It was a genuine account, and these were heroic people. Everything was real, and they achieved their mission, unlike what American specialists presented to us. What does Leonov's report say? Pay special attention to the approach maneuvers toward the spacecraft. In future missions, when moving away from the craft, special attention must be paid to avoiding angular velocities and ensuring that all handheld equipment is securely attached to the spacesuit, keeping hands free. One would think such precautions should have been taken beforehand, yet they didn't even consider securing the tools, which could have easily drifted into space or, worse, harmed the crew or the craft itself. These are real-life challenges. Our great cosmonauts handled them with honor, and they deserve immense respect. We should applaud them, as this year, on March 18, we celebrate the 60th anniversary of that heroic event. And, of course, we have our share of folk humor. This is how people imagine Leonov in open space. Smoking, by the way, is very bad for your health. Leonid Vasilyevich, what you've shown us today once again proves that of all the arts, the most important for us is cinema, as Vladimir Lenin supposedly said, according to one of his contemporaries. A big thank you to all viewers who attended today or watched online.